but there's no fuel resistance to it. But
this is the first time we're using Brodac dope over SIG. This is 1 coat of clear. How many coats of clear or SIG do you have on here?
2 coats of light.
2 coats of light coat. Johnny Sanders, Johnny O's new plane. Sanded it out, and this is the first coat. We're doing a test on the bottom. I want to let this dry a half an hour in the garage to see. The object now, John, is to see if this fogs up, if we're in the humidity range. If it is, we add retarder. If it isn't, we just use whatever's left in that can, put the rest on the top, and we're done. But we want to see, because it really is cold out here. You can see your breath, in fact. Okay, now what we'll do, hang this up by the readouts. We'll put this in the garage. Hang this. If this dries in a half an hour now, at 11 o'clock, if this doesn't have any indication of fogging up, we're not going to put any retarder in the paint. We'll just go right with the way it is now. And what we're going to do is put a pint of clear on here, right over the SIG. It looks pretty shiny right now.
Yeah, it looks pretty good. That's correct.
looks real good, in fact. All right. Who's the next customer in this thing? Jacobone, where's your plane?
It's right here.
Okay. This is Rich Jacobone's Cardinal at this point in time, ready for a coat of silver. Brodac silver, we put the talc, we made our own silver filler. Okay, we're all mixed up here, ready to go? What are you giving them, the last rites or something? Okay, we need something to jig these up with. We need pieces of wire or something. You got anything? What have you been using at home?
Oh, drills.
Okay, you got them with you or you didn't bring them? Is that covering good, Rich? See, part of this whole thing is the guys in the club like Rich that want to learn this. If nobody helps you at this point, yeah, well, how do you? Well, where are you going to go? To Joe Besh's house and learn this? You know, he's going to say, use my account here.
No, he doesn't know how to do it, you dummy.
No, he's doing good. He's doing good. Keep your thumb on the end of that when you're doing an elevator. That's it.
You don't get any pain on your thumb, you're not doing it right.
Yeah, if you get done and you don't have to wash your hands, you didn't do a good job. Get around the edges always first. It's easier to get an edge. Now, we're lucky today there's not a lot of wind blowing here. There's days I'm doing this and a hurricane's blowing and the birds are using me for target practice, you know, and Kajeski's ready to...
The shrubs become silver.
Oh, God. The shrubs are silver. My wife's car is silver. All right. I just looked. It's 28. We got the bottom of this. Look at this great little heater we got here, the Kajeski heater. Bottom coat is dry. You can hardly see it with all the fog on the windows, boy. You can tell there's a lot of moisture in this air. But if it doesn't fog up in here, see, if this, we're letting the bottom dry. If this doesn't fog up in a half an hour, you know we're in great. The camera's fogging up here. You can't. You see, the good thing about practicing on filler, you put too much on, you sand it off, you miss a spot, just go back and get it. So by the time we get that you're spraying your color coats, you know, you want to be, yeah.
How is it?
You could put more on. That's a thin coat. You're putting it on lighter than I would, but this is good practice with. See, there's dry spots. As you reflect into the sun, you can see a dry spot?
Yeah.
Where it looks dry, right there, that's it. Put some more. There you go. Just put some more.
Yeah, it's easy when you put silver on because...
The silver shows you the mistake. That's the whole thing with the silver.
Well, you could always sand it off if you put too much on.
Sure, and you want to sand this with 400 or 320. Yeah, Mike took my last 2 sheets of 320 the other day. Oh, Dad, you done my whole
sleeve. I got to bring.
You got a sleeve? Okay.
I bought a sleeve.
Okay. Always buy a sleeve. You fool around, you need sandpaper. You want to build planes. Guys, now you got too close there. You see that? Yeah. Now look, watch what. Hold it right the way it is. I'll show you something. Watch. Don't even think about it. See?
Yeah.
See, nobody will know you how to run.
Well, you can always sand that.
Yeah. You're better off being too far away than too close. What that happens is you're going to sand this all off. The next time we see the plane, it won't look silver at all. It'll just have the little silver in the valleys.
I think we... See, this is the other hole.
Yeah, okay.
That's the one you put in.
Okay. That's the right one. You put that wrong. This is, by the way, he's criticizing me on my own tape. That's the hole we're going to use right there.
You think so?
Yes.
Why?
Look, I got him. I got him right where I want him now.
That's upside down.
This is the right one. Whose plans are you looking at?
I fly the other way, don't you remember?
Oh, that's right. Oh, sorry. He flies ass backwards. Yeah, you're right. You know what? My sincerest apologies.
Of course.
He flies backwards, the Ray brother has to go the other. Oh, man. See, even I didn't know that.
But I left it alone because that was Wendy's.
And he had to put on a video that, and Wendy never erases the tape. Well, I'm going to get even with him. All right, look. Here's the deal. You got that ready to dry. Wait, I'll get it. Give it to Mike.
That's right. That's on video, huh?
You bet, and I don't erase tape to avoid embarrassing myself or you. All right, you feel comfortable with that, Mike? Okay, whenever we do a spray seminar, Rich, it's best, even the ones we do up by Scott Smith's, it's best to let everybody get their hand, and spray and filler is the best thing in the world.
Oh, sure.
Here's the reason. Who cares if you get it on? You wipe it with your finger. Who cares if... And Mike needs a little practice. We're going to do his plane next week.
Okay.
He's ready. He's got to put some more clear on it. So we're ready. See, we're getting a little bit of breeze now, which is even better. It's blowing the stuff. Just use the sun. Use it like a mirror.
Yeah.
See, if you get used to using that as a mirror, by the time you get to where you're painting the plane, the color and the trim, you'll be comfortable. You could come borrow the compressor. You don't even need me. I could die of a terrible accident. You know, a tree could fall on me or something. Mike and I could fall off a ladder someday. All right. Now, when you get to this patch, where you put the patch, spray this first. Then when you go back and paint the plane, there'll be an extra coat of paint on here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then you know what I'll do? I'll do one side of the wing first. Let that dry to show you how I want you to do it. And the bottom. Always do the bottom first. Yeah, practice on the bottom. That spray's nice, huh, Mike?
Nice.
Yeah. And this stuff sands, Rich. You got 320, that gray sandpaper.
So what am I supposed to do now?
Do the other side.
Spray the rest.
Hold it in the middle because you're going to bury the middle of it inside the fuselage, so you don't really care. Show him how to grab it, Mike. Grab it right around the horn.
Right here.
Right.
Yeah, now you don't care about... No, just leave the fingerprints in there. You're not going to see the inside, the middle of the thing.
There you go.
As he spray paints my camera. What are those guys doing? They look like a bunch of happy old men in that garage,
Run
right?
his finger on the spray.
They're sniffing glue in there or what? Sniffing dope fumes?
Yeah.
Johnny, you want to practice on a flap?
There you go.
No, it's not.
This is filler. You can't make a problem. You just give Rich something to do to sand this down.
No, man.
Get a sleeve at 320, Rich, or even better, 400 or both. You know, so you can... Okay. And just sand it off, and you'll be ready. Then we put silver on with no talcum powder in it. There you go. What a pro. Martine, I'm going to send Martine a copy of this video. Here's the story. Gene Martine, a good friend of Rich and I's, he's complaining that the carbon fiber gear are too expensive, so we're going to wait till one comes out of the mold with a big bubble in it or something. And then we're going to heat it and twist it and step on it a few, drive over it with the van, and then send it to him with a copy of this video. Yeah, old Gene, when he was making up spinners and handles, he didn't think nothing of charging $50 for a prop nut, boy. Now that he's not consumer, everything's so expensive. Oh, my God. What a wimp. Gene, you are a wimp. You give it okay. Get the edges first. You figured that out already. Just get the edges.
The problem was...
See, now you can hold it. Until you spray that last little bit, you just hold it in your arm. Or you can make the nice little fixtures and jigs to hold everything, but hey, this way works too. With the wing now, because I want to show Rich the technique. We're going to spray the bottom piece of it, bottom first, a full coat, then go up around the ribs, get all the edges 2, 3, 4, 5 extra times. Then we're going to put this in the garage to dry, with one side to dry. Take Johnny O's plane out and do the clear on the top, so that we're always flip-flopping back and forth. You getting comfortable with that now, Rich?
Yeah.
Getting better? Okay. The unfortunate thing in the world is there's just no way to get comfortable other than just go out and spray something. And nothing better than spraying some filler just to get comfortable with the material. Keep it in the sun to candle it. If you don't have a sunlight, use a bright light. Set up a bright 100-watt bulb somewhere.
Now that I don't think I should do. Once you put it in there, they took care of you, in my opinion.
Okay, now this is all the areas that are going to need extra. Always around the cap strips. There's a couple little divots here that he wanted to work on. Any place you see the patch, so that we can bury those bad areas in paint. What we're trying to do, where the silk span seam is, we want that all buried. Now, from this point on, we could start at one end of the wing and just paint the wing silver, and then put this side aside to dry.
It was quick. I'm saying,
Yeah, sort of. I'm looking at all the imperfections now that we're putting the silver on. So Lindy said they'll disappear after the silver.
Yeah, he's learning, Andy. Andy, you want to do a little practice spraying?
This is nice.
That looks great.
I put a different cowling on it.
Yeah, I remember. Cool. All right. It's Mike's turn to spray the primer.
Tucker Special.
You can go over the cap strips 4 or 5 times, Mike. You'll never put too much on the cap strips. See what this allows you to do? You find the bad spots. Rich is picking up all the bad spots. Rich, you got to be careful. Rich, you got to really watch your sanding block. You're picking up, those are from picking up globs of glue or something. Always put a lot extra, especially if you're spraying the filler. Spray it right on. Go back over that like 4 or 5 times, Mike. 23 degrees out here on my thermometer over there. It's cold.
How cold is it, Lee?
23. The pond is solid ice.
No wonder I was freezing.
There's heat in the garage. Go sit in the garage and warm up a little bit.
I got one of those ready heaters.
Yeah.
And I got to keep the garage cracked so I don't...
Oh yeah, you can't seal it up like and go in there and you know.
So my head and everything is hot and big and my feet are freezing. So I got to keep the garage cracked. Is that primer or is that silver?
No, it's Brodax silver with talcum powder in it. We mixed our own filler.
Hey, Windy.
Looking at about an hour and a half of dry time here. Let's see how that's sanding, Rich. Don't press down when you're sanding. The key to this is don't press down. When you press down, that's when you see if it powders off, it's ready to sand. Yeah, now just light. You got to get used to the idea. If you press down, it's like a Dremel tool. You know when you press a Dremel tool, what happens? It doesn't work.
First thing I do.
All right, this guy's drying up nice. Everything's hot and humid and dry, and everybody's complaining it's cold out here. So what's the problem we got to deal with here? The wheel pants are locking up? Give me the scenario.
I built it, and when I put these together and everything, it was spinning freely. I had some WD-40 on it.
Okay.
Now that it's out in the cold, it seemed to have closed up around the wheel.
Okay, let me tell you what happened. You used Stay Bright silver solder and never defluxed it.
Defluxed it?
Defluxed it? Okay, what happens is the fluxing agent is sulfuric acid. It then corrodes the metal when you put it outside. See what's happening to the camera lens? It's all fogging up. Same thing is happening to the wheel pants. The material, it rusts. So when I go in there, what's going to happen is it rusts shut. It's a good thing you did it now and not 2 years later. We have a way of fixing it. Herman, we did one already. We tried to spin the wheels. Spin that one, Andy. This is when they were done. They really weren't spinning the way they should. And if you wait until you're all done, obviously you're dead in the water. So we cut the one slice off. We got little brass bushings. Where's the other brass bushing? The little brass bushings that okay. Put the brass bushings on the wheel. And then we'll grease it a little bit and then put this right back. We had to cut the side of this one off to get it off, but because we use thin CA, that'll just clean right up, and these are going to be glassed when they're all done. Well, you diffused a time bomb here, baby. Imagine you get the flame all buffed out and the wheel doesn't spin. Oh, man.
I know what you're involved in.
Nothing's longer than this one.
All right, but there's a good lesson to learn. That's definitely... If the inside one doesn't turn, your day is ruined. The outside one doesn't turn, you may have some sloppy takeoffs. Anyway, he redid the cowl here with a piece of wire.
You can talk like an expert.
Andy, I'm going to give you some carbon fiber to put in. I think you're better off. Just make a ring of carbon fiber in that whole thing, too.
Okay.
So next time I see you can have that now. I got plenty of this stuff. Now, we have a unique opportunity here. We've never had a chance to try to sand out some of this silver filler when it was more than a couple hours old. In fact, Rich sanded his out while we were all still sanding out in the garage. He did a little test. Sanded out pretty well, too, but what's unique about this? Now, this has been sitting over a weekend. And once it gasses out and it doesn't smell, I bring it in the house, put it in the rack, or put it up by the heating vent. And I want to get some idea of how this silver filler little test of mine is going to go. Now, the thing that's different, it's not the same when you sand. If you can, even Brodak dope, if you can let it dry an extra day or so, it makes it even easier, especially if you're wet sanding it. So let me get the table set up and let's see how this sands out. Always do I sand it out a piece just to do a little test. In this little test, I was trying to show Rich Jacobone when he was here just about how much silver filler to sand out. Well, if you don't want to really sand it all out, unless you have too much clear underneath, you just want to leave it in the little low spots. And so, because this is the first time we're going to be sanding out the fuselage filler, there'll be some little pock marks and little spots we want to fill in along the way. But this sanded out so easily. Now, if you're going to wet sand it, there's two choices you have here. And let me go over them, because this is a part where a lot of people really waste a lot of time and get frustrated. This is a real significant part of the job, to get this silver filler that it's nice and flat and that it's ready for the first coat of silver without talc. Now, for this part of the test, 600 sandpaper. This is wet or dry. Time you're not familiar with doing something, you can always do the bottom first. Since we're going to be doing a lot of testing here, I wanted to get this spot. This is about the smoothest spot on the whole plane, rather than getting into angles and corners, so it would show up better on the video. The only reason I'm doing this is so it would show up. Now, using this sandpaper dry, a lot of people like to work dry. They don't like to get the M600, either to smell in the house, or they don't like to have the hands get dried out from it, or whatever. So you always have this choice. You have a choice of sanding with just plain sandpaper. The problem is the sandpaper will always load up relatively quickly. In this case, we're getting it down. You'd probably need, realistically, to sand out the whole fuselage. You can see how it just loads the paper up. You would probably need maybe 4 or 5 sheets to sand out the whole fuselage. In the case of wet sanding, this piece will probably be enough. So again, you have the choice. You want to have a lot of choices. Now, keep in mind, this is dried over a weekend, so it's just, you can see it's just coming right off. But it'll always, because of the talcum powder, and it'll always tend to load up the sandpaper. Now, the same thing, and let's just go right on here, so it's a real the most valid test of all. If you put a little M600 on, either way, you're not looking at a big job sanding out a coat of filler. And you want to sand it and just leave the slightest little bit of... Rich was amazed how easily his sanded out, and his is not unique. Let me get a towel in any way, but... Now that's our first coat of filler. I'm guessing to sand out the whole body here, we're talking about a half an hour, 45 minutes. Either way, whether you sand dry or wet, you want to have both choices. Always have both choices. And if you can afford to have it dry that extra little, a day or so, if you can put it up by a heating vent, it'll even be easier. Now, in my case, there's nobody in the house today. So I'm just going to wet sand it out with M600. I'm going to go out onto the wing. You probably can see here where I've kind of been working this area, and I have a couple of rough spots. There's a couple of spots in here that I still need to go over and over 4 or 5 times, but basically most of it is going to be ready. By the end of this day, we'll be ready for the first coat of real silver with no talc in it. I don't think I'll need the second coat. But if you did need it, if you had a lot of grain, I'll look and see when I sand this out. If I find any spot with extra grain on it, of course I'll just spray on a second coat, give it an hour or so to dry, and sand it out. Just keep in mind the objective of all sanding. There's two possibilities. One is that you're trying to change the shape of a piece of material, wood in in this case tissue or rib, you're trying to change the shape with that sanding operation. And the second part of this is you're not trying to change the shape at all, you're trying to impart a smooth surface. Now when you're trying to change the shape or blend the shape, something around 220 paper, even 320 is probably appropriate. When you're trying to finalize a finish and get that smooth, you can even hear the difference. When you're trying to impart a smooth finish, you need to use smooth paper. Now, this would probably even work with 400. I just happen to have a whole sleeve of 600. And you saw how quickly this cut right down. Again, one of the nice parts about Brodak Dope is that it cuts. It doesn't turn to jello, jelly, peanut butter and jelly, I don't know, a jelly sandwich or whatever. This part of the job is where you really have a time saving when you're using all Brodak Dope. And this plane, right now, if this were some alternative, if this were auto primer, this might be an all-day job to do this thing. Now, I don't know how long this is going to take, but I'm guessing from the way the nose cut down that at best, even if the phone starts ringing today, maybe an hour, 2 hours, I'm done with the whole thing. Then I can go on to, I can shoot a coat of real silver on here, and I can pretty much look around in for little things I want to correct, fix, whatever. Because as that coat is drying, I want to do the nose detailing. I still have the little fillet pieces to go in here, and I have other considerations. So I'm trying to do a little time window of things that'll be real effective here. While that coat of silver is drying, as soon as it gets dry to the touch, I can start working on some other part of this project. It is such a difference when you're sanding any material. It can be auto primer, it can be any brand of dope. When you have a material that cuts, now so you can see right now, this material, even with 600 paper, is just coming right off, even though it's got the talc in it. And by the way, if you really want it to be experimental, you could pick up some zinc stearate, try that as a filler medium in here, but for our purposes, the talc is so cheap and so easy to obtain, you never have to have a price. You just go right down to the drugstore and buy it. Again, this is the kind of stuff you really only have to see once or twice. Once is plenty. And getting that real nice smooth silver base. If you were using a color other than silver, I don't think you'd pick up the little error. I see an error right there that I didn't see when this was in raw wood. The floor, I didn't see that when that was just in wood color. I didn't see it till I sanded it out, so maybe I'm going blind. I want to fill that with a little bit of the filler material that we use at this point in time. You just take a razor blade and trowel some in there. This is a good material, a good choice. You can see what happens in my case is the tube wasn't sealed tight. I'm going to have to gouge some of that out. Make sure when you put this on, it goes on nice and thin. If it isn't, put a drop of lacquer thinner or even Brodak Dope thinner in there. Soften it up. One tube of this, you'll never buy a second tube. Any body shop supply house has it. It's made by 3M, part number 05960. Now this material takes about a minute to dry, so I'll work on another part of the plane while this is drying. And if you need to build up anything thicker than a piece of paper, do it in thin layers. And as I'm going around now, I'm trying to fill in any little spots that I see that don't look real nice. Another good point. When you're doing an area where you flood it out and basically it kind of drips around either the wing or the fuselage, at the end of every little area here, what you want to do is wipe the plane off. Two reasons. It accumulates and turns into like a mud that can, if you leave it sit on a plane for a half an hour or 45 minutes, you always want to wipe around it. It just tends to get sloppy and it's hard to get a nice, I don't know. I've seen it where it cakes up and it's really difficult to get off without sanding. In this case, we're still in the substrate stage, so it's not a big deal, but I try to work neat, try to work clean every step of the way, and it just seems to make it. Now, here's another little thing. I've seen, as I'm going along, I'm seeing hairs that have come out of the brush from time to time. That brush that Ed Gallagher sent has been working real well, but now I've used it for X amount of hours. It's starting to lose hairs. But wherever there's a hair, just sand it out. It really isn't a big deal to get the hairs out. It's always good to, once this dries out, these little rubber blocks are real handy, and you can see that kind of filled in. I'm sure that'll disappear in the final finish now, no problem at all. And keep as much of that sanding residue off the plane at all times as you can. This is going just as quick as can be. Now a good way to get the rounded spots, get a final shaping on them, the old shoe shine trick. I thought probably takes a few minutes extra, I'd get a final coat of silver on this stab. I was just thinking about this carbon fiber on here. What a job that was. I want to really get down in on these angles and fillets too. Now this is almost ready. I'm going to wipe it all down with nice clean paper towels and M600 and try to get out there before dark and shoot a coat of just plain silver, Brodax silver, 60% thinner. And make sure it's all wiped down. There's no drips and drools and whatever on this. Okay, that first coat of real silver is in there drying as the breeze blows it around. But this was not a pleasant thing painting out here today. The wind is blowing. Everything's making me crazy out here. All right, we're going to let that dry overnight. Well, I guess you can figure this out. We're in the middle of a storm and we're predicting 2 or 3 days of rain. So what I'm going to try to do, and this is a good tip for time management, is try to get 2 or 3 things, maybe more done today, things that I don't need to use the outdoor good weather to spray in. And a lot of little detailing on a plane can be done. I don't need to be outside, so I'm going to try to schedule some of that for the next couple of days while we're in this time of bad weather. Okay, our silver is really dried up. Now this is real silver. This does not have talcum powder in it. So one of the things I can do today, being it's a rainy day, I can work through this and pick out, now for instance I see a spot right here that I don't like, where the silver is real thin. But I can go ahead and pick out any little errors that I want to correct in by the fillet here. Looks like it could use another coat. Again, on this side of the fuselage, I saw something that looked a little, right up here I see something I don't like. If you can see that. See, it shows up in the silver. See that? That'll disappear in another couple of coats of silver. But now, from this point on, the only sandpaper I want to use on real silver is 1200 and M600. I don't want to try to sand this with 600 now. That's how you get yourself in trouble and you see sanding scratches basically down in the last couple of coats of paint. Now you can see a couple of dry spots up here where I don't have enough paint, but because I'm going to work on the nose section, I don't even care about that. A little spot that I just hit with 1200, looks like some little dust fell into the paint. Some little dry spots up around the fillets. Now to avoid this, when I get to sand the fuselage, all 1200, the whole trick here is, once you get that first coat of real silver on, and you're really ready to do, micro fine finishing now you don't want to get any scratches in it. Scratches just make it worse. And you don't want to sand quite as much off. You want to leave more of the silver on so that the next coat of silver will be absolutely flawless. And on a rainy day like this, this will be a good day to do this. Now, a lot of times, at this point in the finish, this is when it really gets important. I want to put these numbers up on the board. Again, this is available in body shop supply houses, and there's one near everybody. I know I might not have put this on in a while, but this is really worthwhile. These are available from Consolidated, and the seals are such that they don't... Let me get the phone number of this up on here, because I get this question all the time. The number is 216-425-3900. Consolidated Plastics. They make the bottles with seals that don't deteriorate. If you use a Windex bottle, you're dead. A week later, it's spraying all over, the seal collapses, and you wind up using $20 worth of product for nothing instead of buying a bottle. These are under $5, I think. They last forever. A typical plane, when I'm doing a typical plane, this is the end of the first gallon, by the way. I usually try to get 2 fresh gallons. This is a degreasing agent. A lot of people don't understand what the purpose of this is. It serves a lot of purposes. Number one, it totally kills anything on your hand that's like grease or oil, so you don't contaminate the whole plane like you do if you don't use M600. Also, when you're using 1200 paper, and we're going to transition over to 1200 paper right now for that final sand out, you don't get any scratches at all with 1200. You can just bear down and grind, and you don't get the scratches, and that's the big advantage of using. And you can't use 1200 without M600, or you need some kind of a soapy water Windex, windshield washer fluid. Several other people have tried and suggested several things, but I still like the best of all choices is the M600 in a Consolidated spray bottle for this part of the finish. 1200 sandpaper comes in half sheets. It comes in a sleeve. And if you can afford it, if there's some compelling reason not to do it, it's a lot cheaper if you buy a sleeve. Well, you want to take a sleeve of this, and let's peel one sheet off. It kind of sticks together. You want to cut it into smaller, manageable pieces. And I've found that I've tried using jars and jugs and all different ways of using this. Small pieces about the size of 4 postage stamps and the spray and some clean paper towels give you the best chance, the best economy of using the material to get that real flat finish. Now, I don't want to sand off all the silver. I want to sand a lot less. See, with each coat that I do, I sand less and less off because I'm building up to a nice flat surface here. You can see if you look at this real close, I don't know if I showed this up front yet, but there's the hint of dry spots, places where it really could use more paint. Well, I put this on as dry as possible. Now what I want to do, I want to put a real, well, we don't know if this is going to take at this point. I'm 2 more coats of silver, 1 more, 0, 10, 50, I don't know, but when I'm done, I want this whole plane to look like it's machined out of a billet of aluminum. This I know I'm dry, and I know I still have some high spots coming up here, so it's not a big deal to just sand a whole coat of silver off. It just takes, again, if you try to use 600, you run the risk of scratches. When you use, this is why a lot of people, they kind of miss the boat. They put too much on, and then when they sand it off, the plane starts turning into a 20-ounce finish. The whole finish from start to end is not going to weigh 10 ounces on an average plane, and if you can really do like a real thin finish, like many of the top finishers can do, I'm sure you can get it down to about 7 or 8. But now, if you can see how quick that goes. Just rub your finger on that and rub your finger. Well, it's no comparison. The 1200 leaves no scratches at all. That's the advantage of using 1200. Again, the technique that I like, and there's several others, but I like to just keep the area wet. You really can't use a sanding block efficiently with 1200. And I kind of constantly move in the paper, and you can see how relatively quickly this takes it right off. Now, if it isn't taking it off like this, then there's a possibility you've either put too much paint on at one time, and this is one of those magic tricks that once you get the technique down, once you're real comfortable and happy doing 1200 sanding, this opens the door to having those 7-ounce finishes where the plane, you know, I always say almost anybody, and boy, you can take a ringmaster and decoupage it and just cover it with one of those 2-part clears, and yeah, it'll shine like a piece of linoleum or like the top of a countertop or something. But a hand-rubbed lacquer finish there's just no way to describe it. Anybody that's ever done one knows right away what I'm talking about. There's no way you can fake it. There's no way you can get it in 2 hours or something. So I'll do the rest of this off camera. It's not a real trick how to do this. You just want to be real careful, and you want to constantly use your hand. And from this point on, maybe this next coat of silver will be the last coat we need. I don't know. We're not going to be able to do anything outside today with that rain, so I'll spend my time detailing this out, as much time as I can allocate to this project today. Now, these little polywogs, these are really handy. Again, even every coat of silver gets just dressed off to get that shape back. Filling in all the imperfections as I go. And there have been a few of them that I've right around here, in fact. The silver is the whole ticket to making it show. If you don't want to see the mistakes, don't put the silver on. It's as easy as that. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff, and I just try to put my little feelings and notations along the way. There's really, John Dihedral was famous for saying, while we were doing some construction work, there's no other way to do this other than to just do it. And it's filthy, it's sloppy, it's disgusting. But boy, at the end of the day of sanding, you've really upgraded the model in some way. And there's just no way to putter around and do little parts of it and go for coffee, and I guess you just have to nail it down. You just have to go after it. Now, we don't have the canopies back yet. I touched base with Midgley, and they will be coming in the next week, or that's what he said last week. Just kidding around. But Dave is doing a good job. He's doing a nice job on Dan Banjock's Mustang canopy. And certainly that's going to be a world-class piece of equipment too. So what I've been doing is I've been making up a little list of things that I thought, if we run out of time here, run out of things to do, we can do the rest of them in some sequence that'll, well, it would make sense to do them in anyway. Anyway, this silver is just really, this is the point at which it gets to be fun. Now, as I'm going along again, I'm picking up little spots. There was a little spot back here somewhere, right here. But the more you can do this ahead of time, the easier it is later on to basically, correct. You don't have to correct these. If you do them as you go along at the very end of the silver, they'll pretty much be in the bank. So far, the silver is just sanding out beautifully. That is the one characteristic of Brodak dope that nobody can fault. It sands beautifully. Well, it's just in a class by itself. This is always the telltale sign when you're nearing the end of the day. You have a bunch of this and an empty M600 bottle. Well worth it, though. This is one of the steps you can't leave out, realistically. At some point in time, I hope you can see this, even though I'm sanding silver, look at the tail section of the plane. You can see when you sand with 1200, you get a reflection that you can candle. It actually gets shiny. And that's one of the advantages. Now, when we put the base on this, if the material underneath it was like this, you'd be putting on 10 times the amount of material. So when you put the final pigmented dope on, it's going on a mirror. It's going on a perfectly smooth, flat surface, and that's part of, if you can get it, I don't know how I can candle this any better. Even though there's no clear in the plane, you can see the light reflecting in the back part of the fuselage. That surface that you sand with 1200 and M600, for all purposes, is a finish you could buff out. If you wanted to buff that out, you didn't want any pigmented paint on it. But that's a, I don't know how to explain it. That's a thing you can keep in mind, that by sanding this out, you're actually saving the next coat of paint because it's not going over a surface that's all full of potholes, and you're not filling it in with more paint and more paint. You're starting with the minimum amount of truly pigmented paint on the whole aeroplane this way by doing it with this method. Now, in today's mail, this came from Frank McMillan. They'd spoken to him, well, I knew about these, but I didn't know where to get them. Now, here's the address. And I'll go over this real quick, since this is something I may be using in the next month or so. Phone number, fax number. I'm going to see if I can get a full catalog. I think what Frank did is he got this off the internet, but look, this is one of the things we could use probably. The Rolls-Royce emblem, somewhere on it. I'm sure Warbird Spitfires didn't have that on there, but if you're doing a straight line stunner, this is one of the nice things. And by the way, what these are excellent for, you buff through the paint or you have a little glitch in it, this is a good way to hide it. And of course, sometimes you see a straight line stunner, a Cardinal or whatever, SV11, and right in the middle of nowhere there's a gas cap or something. Well, that's always been a good trick, but obviously, they give you a couple little things. This looks like something they got off the internet. Jerry Claudel. Anyway, these are pretty much like Letrasets, except they tell you to warm the ProMark graphics, warm the surface a little bit before you apply them, how to use a burnishing tool, large markings, flat, that it really doesn't work well on flat painted surfaces, and on and on and on. I'm going to try to get their whole catalog, and I'll try to put more of this on the tape, especially if we wind up using these. They may have something. One of the things I'd really like to find is little propeller emblems for the Rotel props. But anyway, this is from Frank McMillan, and hey, I really appreciate it. And like and Frank should know, he's a semi-scale modeler with Al Rabe from way back. When you're a semi-scale modeler and you're looking for all these little details and things, if you have a good source for them, makes it real easy. If you don't have, you really could make yourself crazy. Anyway, Frank, appreciate it a whole lot, and we'll see if we can get a catalog from him. Now, it hasn't stopped raining all day. I'm going to kind of give up on the idea that I can paint today. But one of the things I can start doing is, on this Spitfire, unlike some of the other ones, in fact, here's a picture of it right down here when I'm looking. I had the valve cover blisters. These were the late model Spitfires that had the Griffin. The Griffin was a much larger engine, and obviously it stuck through in these blister type things. This one, being an early model Spit, doesn't have that giant valve cover appendage hanging out there. It has a much more subtle look. Now, one of the things I wanted to do is, while I was doing this, I wanted the glass cloth, and we have 3 layers over the front, to go the complete length of the nose, because that acts actually as a former to resist vibration. But what I want to do is try to copy those very small, they're very subtle little valve cover assemblies that go on the early model Spitfires. Now, there's a couple of details that I'm going to put in the nose. One of them is, I haven't really decided on which one of the manifolds I want to copy. There's at least 10 different variations of manifolding, Siamese manifolds and individual, but I know that I can do. In fact, I could make both molds up, being it's so easy to make these molds. But one of the things I want to do, you can see how the valve comes. In other words, the spinner on a real Spitfire doesn't just go like a stunt ship. It has a little bit of an indentation up to the valve cover and down. Now, we didn't have that on the original Spitfire. I just made the nose just like a stunt ship. So I want to, each time, of course, you're trying to make the model more and more realistic, and this is one of the things I'd like to try to add on this model. Now, this is probably the best of the pictures that I have. It shows the Siamese exhaust and those little blisters, I guess we could call them, for lack of a better word. Another picture. I just want to get this in my mind before I actually start doing some carving. Look at the books a little bit, try to get some idea of just how this forms out. And I know on the Seafire, that was one of the little, detail touches or whatever you want to call it, that a lot of people ranted and raved about. So I want to be real careful I don't overdo this or underdo it. Try to get it right at that happy medium line. Again, we have plenty of documentation, so this should be just a question of copying or getting it as close as we can to the books. And again, the Seafire had the simulation of the Griffin in the nose. Again, we're going to try, and again, the original Spitfire, we had a whole different treatment. So again, each one is like a little individual item. Each one I try to make a little bit better than the one before. But of course, all of this stuff is in the eye of the beholder. And on Joe's original Spit, he really just did the same thing I did. He left the valve covers off altogether. the things that really helps is just having the documentation. And over the years, this is going to be our 5th year of dealing and thinking about, dreaming about Spitfires. We've really accumulated a lot of material. And of course, we're always glad to share it with anybody that shares the love of warbirds. This picture again gives you a little idea of just what that shape looks like. And again, it's real hard to copy exactly. It's not real hard, it's impossible, because we don't really have a scale-size spinner, but to try to create the illusion. Now, Frank McMillan was one of the people that talked to me at length about when they were doing the semi-scale planes of years gone by. You couldn't do a scale size. Certain things would be scale, certain things had to get stretched and like silly putty or whatever you want to call it. But this is one of those things that you really can't just make it scale. You really kind of, and what I'll do is I'll make them a little bit bigger than they have to be to start with, and then kind of hopefully try to blend them in if I can. And here's what we do is as we start with the early Spitfires, you can get an idea of just what I'm talking about as the evolution of the Spitfire went into more and more powerful models, later models. Now you can see here comes the Griffin-powered ones. The nose section is totally different. The scoop under here changes. An awful lot of things change as you get into the later and later model Spitfires. I guess this is one of the best pictures I ought to leave out. I'm trying to leave because it also gives you where this ends. So I can't see the transition in a lot of the pictures. It transitions way back here. And since this is an early model, this would probably be the most prototypical of all the ones I have. And by the way, look at the small scoop. The early ones had this little small oil cooler. Oh, this is the air inlet. What am I talking about? The oil cooler was underneath on the other side wing. They only had, early model ones only had one radiator. I always like this, and this is one of the ones when I was doing the Seafire that I used to look at over and over again. That nose section, boy, that is, the nose sections, the cannons, I was able to replicate the cannons. And boy, if I could ever talk Randy Smith into sending me down that, I don't know what you would call it, that counter-rotating thing that he had back in the 90s, boy, that would have just been the end-touch semi-scale. As you look at some of the development things, there's really a lot of choices and a lot of options when you're doing Spitfires. Again, the late model one. This was real helpful, believe me. This is the kind of stuff you think is real easy to model, and then you go to do it, and it takes 40 carvings to get it to where you're happy with it. I know it took me a long time on a Seafire to get that right. There's one of the unusual variations with the stripes on the nose. And I'll tell you, no matter what, I still like that shark mouth. I think that may just appear on this model. I like that shark mouth. Here's a good photo showing the early squadrons, and of course this is what we're trying to simulate on the Siamese exhausts. Hard not to like that nose section. A nice under view showing the exhaust and the clip ring version. Some good detailing here we can use for the manifolds. And here's one that just a little bit different. You never see this on production ones. This was to reduce exhaust glare during night flying. Only one was ever made. So we've been inspired. Hopefully we can start carving up some wood, get some idea how many shots it's going to take to get this. What I want to do is get a rough idea of how long I want to make these. And I'm guessing 6 inches would be 5.5, 6 inches as a good starting point. I just want to get, again, I'm thinking 5.5, 6 inches. Maybe a little. What I'll do is I'll make it bigger than it has to be in the very beginning. So I'll lop off a chunk of this block. Once I get a pattern, of course, I'll pass it on to Bob Martens for his finalizing of the plans. In its roughest state, I want to try to get the curve on this side of the fuselage to match. Again, this is way bigger than I expect it to be in the final piece, but at least I have this general shape. So I'll start with the flat part and just cut some of this material away. That angle cut, now I can start to put the curve in there. I can see it's going to take quite a bit. So what I need to do is maybe I could do it on a belt sander, is just put that curve right in there. So I want that to go right up on the curve section. I feel like Norm Abrams doing it. Then I'll just get a rough shape of that curve in the fuselage. I'm using this little gouge to get the last couple of fits in here before I can, because there's also a little curve in it also. Of course, we're way bigger than we have to be, but I guess it would be smart to get this surface first. I'm trying to dope this out as I go, and then contour this in. You're just taking a little slice at a time off of this. I know this is going to have to be a lot smaller. And I'm trying to keep more material in the front and take most off of the back. And whittling it away and making it smaller and smaller. One of the things that's real handy, a good little tip, always is the roll of, and obviously it's infinitely adjustable. It just seems like this roll pretty much simulates the curve at the top of the fuselage. So I want to get a reasonable fit up against the body before I do any of the real carving in this. Always handy to have these little sanding tools around. I've got a reasonably close fit. I'm still way oversized. The next thing is to get that angle on both ends of the valve covers. These don't have a flat end. They have kind of a flared in end. Just roughly getting that in. And of course this will need a lot more trimming than I'm finished. But you need to get a piece roughed in first. It's just like doing any real construction. You need to get it roughed on before you can make a final piece. Okay, in its roughest stage, I'm going to just start dressing this off little by little with a sanding block. A little test fit here. Still a little on the big side. Now it's close. It's certainly not exactly what I want right now, but what I want to do is carve up the mate so I can start looking at this in 3-dimension with both pieces. So obviously the first thing is to make a pattern and carve the mirror image of this, and then I can look at it in 3-dimension and move it around and see just about how I want to have it. Mirror image thing, obviously what you want to do is look at it from all sides, starting from the front, the top, the side, and try to make the mirror image part. The thing is to just line up, get a rough idea, and I'm using my center line off the mounts just to get a rough idea of how high up I want to have these. Because it's very easy to get these on crooked in some way, and it really would after all this work to have them crooked. I'm trying not to press down on the tape too much. It's the wrong one. and I can start marking roughly how far back I want these, how close, how far back. Now what I did, I tried different layers of tape to see roughly how high up I wanted to have these, and it looks like this is just my spacer tape. They're running parallel to the line of the fuselage. You wouldn't want to have the valve covers facing up or down. Now I just need to make sure this is the spacing I want, that I don't want to go any further up. And what I did, I put the cowl and a spinner on to get a little mock-up feel for exactly where this is going to go. And I've been moving the tape up, down, because I have a reference line of the fuselage side, so I go up a couple of layers of tape, down a couple of layers of tape, and I can get it equal. But looking straight from the front, I have the two valve covers. I don't have them at a parallel one way or another. And in the final result, I want it to look the right distance from the spinner. Now, prototypically, this would go right up to the spinner, but then a real Spitfire would have like a third the length of this nose. So to compensate for that, I'm going to have to go back, and this allows me to just look at it with tape holding it in before I get married or make a commitment here. Having a tape, I can move it back, forward. I can just get different looks of how I think that should look. Now keep in mind what has to happen. The exhaust pipes have to come out the bottom here, so I can't have this on too much of an angle. Now, if this were a scale model, one of the things we would be modeling is one valve cover would be one cylinder bank back. They wouldn't be equal, but because we're not making a scale model, we're going to try to make them relatively equal. And I think the fact that most people that are going to be looking at it are not scale models, it'll look better for our purposes if it's symmetrical rather than scale. And I'm not crazy about it. See, I can move these around. I'm still trying to picture in my mind where those exhausts would be. Of our molding program from years gone by. These are all the rejects that came out of the rejects. With more rejects than real ones here. But anyway, this will just give me an idea so I can use them up for scale. These are some of the old molds we used. This looks like a representative size. And then I have the small ones, the flared end ones. These were the plaster replicas. Now see, just one of the things I can do now by having some of these, I can get an idea of what that's going to look like. Even though I'm going to make a new mold, for sure I'm going to make a new mold. And all the different resin combinations we tried, that you can see what happened with some of them. Some of them were really brittle. Some of them now, even a Seafire, if I was to say, gee whiz, I'm really liking a Seafire type on there, I want to get a feel for just if that's going to look too big, too small. Do I need to make it smaller? Again, this is where it pays, or where it's really to my advantage. Let me go through these and see if I have an example. Old Spitfire ones. Now it looks like the hot tip here is going to be to just use that dimension. See, you'd have to picture where the engine is in the airplane. The engine really, prototypically, this would even be further forward. In fact, now that I see how this looks in full-scale mock-up, I'm going to move these forward a little bit, see if I like that any better. Get this far forward, even though this is better, I just don't like the look. There's something about it that it's hard to imagine. Again, this side is further back. This is where having it all laid up in tape is so handy. Okay, this piece of tape gives us this alignment. Working up there for the bottom line, we have them level in this dimension. Now I just have these tack glued, just the slightest little bit tack glued. Now I can take off all the tape, take all the pieces off, and I can see if I'm going to, well, I don't know, at this point in time, that's about as happy as I can get with it. Now, before I go any further, I want to really carefully take this tape off. Always, whenever you're going to put tape on anything like this, just rub it up on your shirt first. Get rid of the chance that you're going to pull up a chunk of wood and paint and everything. Now, the tape idea is a good way to just get a rough alignment. Pull the tape up slow here. John Brodak's tip of Heating the tape with a hairdryer has always worked well when we're in a pinch. Now you see, you can go back and forth real easy, and at this point in time I can even sand these off, but I'd like to put them on with just a minimum amount of glue right now and do a final shaping just to see. I'm getting near the end of today's session anyway, so I guess this is all I can expect to do today. Okay, this is all we were able to do. The session is over. Now when I get back into working on this tomorrow, what I'm going to try to do is harden these up with thin CA, put a little bit of air epoxy maybe up in the front here, get this blend into the spinner. And again, I'll have all night to think about what some of the choices are. I want to get a real nice blend into this. Now I need to seal it with thin CA because obviously I'm going into something hard from something soft. So it's been a good day, and I guess that's all I'm going to get done today. See you in the morning. Okay, now today, one of the little jobs I wanted to do, of course we have no weather to paint. I want to do the final carving and sanding in on this, harden it up with thin CA, maybe put some air epoxy around here, I don't know. I want to do the final shaping though. And by having all the pictures around, this should be relatively easy, but of course I made these blocks oversized and I want these to blend a little bit more. This is too accentuated at this level, but the more I think, and this is another thing too, it's always good to do is come back the next day and look at something before you make it final. So having said that, let me get ready to do a day's work here. Now, one of the things I like is having these Bob Martens blocks with the angles back, because what I want to do, I want to try to work this up. So I don't want to grind. I know that the surface here is hard, the wood is soft. I want to try to stay, in fact it's hard to have it in this angle, but I want to keep my hand as a little sanding guide. Now one of the things this will allow us to do is in the final analysis, hopefully when I do make the little molds for the exhaust pipe, I'll already have this piece already in place. Now a lot of times you see people that put the exhaust pipes back here or something, the motor is up here, the motor is not in the back. A lot of things that to a person who knows a little bit about how a real airplane is built might be, well, not prototypical anyway. Again, this is the kind of thing, this is just taking a lot of little, I'll spend a lot of little time this morning trying to look at it from a lot of different angles, make sure it's even. These are the kind of things that there's just no real easy, quick way to do this. By the way, I have a friend that I really shouldn't say who it is because it's a little embarrassing, who's going through his stuff, and he found some tapes that we made in 1991. On the tape it says, "Loaner, please return to Windy." He returned it today. What is this, 1990? He had it for 9.5 years. True story. What I'm trying to do, from looking at the pictures, this front part is very obviously pulled out, but then it kind of tapers back. And I figured, well, this is going to be a little difficult, but because we're in this rainy weather that we've been having, I don't mind spending a little, well, I don't mind spending even if it was nice outside. Now the thing you can never do with any surface, you can't get a hard surface and something that's fiberglass and painted. You can't get that perfect blend. I'm going to have to harden these up. Once I get a final shape that I'm relatively satisfied with, and of course the hardest part is getting them symmetrical, even though symmetrical is not really scale. They're not totally symmetrical on a real plane because the banks of cylinders are offset. In the same way that the exhaust pipes always have the white exhaust stains on all the pipes except the first one. And I noticed that when I was at the RC scale judging, the front one doesn't get an exhaust stain. There's nothing coming back on it. But anyway, the guys in RC scale, obviously they're world-class guys and they know that a lot more than I do. There's a lot of little detail sand in here to get this right. But the more I can get the sanding, I really can't get the whole thing done until I get some sanding on it. But from looking at the pictures, this blend back here is pretty obvious. But up here it kind of juts out and then it kind of blends back. You the shape, and this is a real important thing I've said over and over, you really have to you can't sand a hard surface and a smooth surface together. So what I have to do before I do a real final fit on this is harden this up. The easiest way to do this is with some thin CA. And if you're real careful and you're real cute, you won't get a run or a drip. And if you do, you notice I have a Q-tip just sitting right here. I want to go out onto the painted surface if I get a little too much. But by soaking this, now I'm going to soak it, sand it maybe 8-10 times. I'm not going to put that on over and over again, but what you really want to do is get that first coat nice and thick, because it'll get right in, it penetrates, it's capillary action. It'll harden up the wood, and now you'll be able to put a reasonable sanding onto it. You got to just really be careful here you don't get a drip like that, but even if you do, you can just rub it around. I think one of the biggest things you can pick up off any of the videos, a lot of people are not aware of how to get, in other words, they'll let the whole plane go into wood and then paint the whole plane at once, which is okay, but it's a lot of work to do that, and it restricts you in time, because then you get to those days where you can only put one coat of paint on and you're done for the day. Where I always have something dry in, and I always have something that I'm sanding, and always something I'm marrying the seams up on. And in the final, when everything's dry, what it is, a lot of the paint now, like for instance the paint on the wing has already been drying for a month, so that helps in terms of letting it dry out, ready for sanding. And I always have something I can work on for a couple hours at a time. I don't have to dedicate whole blocks of time. I can come down the shop for an hour at a time and get something done. This kind of stuff, you really don't want to use any kicker at all. Just let it sit for a couple of minutes, and you don't get those popcorn-like bubbles coming up through the CA. We'll just let that sit, and we're going to sand that out. That'll be the first coat. The first sand out, you can see up in the front here, that's end grain, so that's one of the things I have to really make sure is soaked if I want to get this blend just right. And boy, that's a major thing, being able to blend soft materials into hard in the final finish. And this is the whole trick to doing it. Just keep sanding it, and make sure that in the final sand out, everything is hard. And then you're able to do a real nice shapings. If one of them is softer than the other and you harden them both up with CA, you can get perfect blends almost every time. Now this whole thing, I have to go back 4 or 5, 8 times, I don't know how many times, but plenty of times before I get it that I'm real happy with the shape and that it's symmetrical. But it's going to take probably the better part of this session. Alright, I guess this is ready for the first coat of silver filler. Let me see if it's stopped raining yet. Okay, before I spray this, I want to just put a little coating of that filler in there. There's just a couple little pinholes. And I got a little spot down here. I think I put my finger in it while I was sanding it. This can dry, get wet, sanded out, and this will be ready for the silver. Okay, a few tricks for sanding down the filler. Always keep it good and wet with M600. Number 2, anytime you use epoxy, dope, this filler, any chemicals, you should always have a fan going or have some good ventilation. That goes without saying. Now, another trick is let this dry plenty good. You really can't sand this, for a half an hour or so. The 3 different colors, blue, red, and green, the difference in them is the dry time. Now, I just happen to like green. But if you're really a rocket scientist, you can buy a tube of red, a tube of blue, and a tube of green. They give you 3 different dry times to work with. The other trick, you never want to use this stuff to make fillets or anything where there's going to be strength involved. It's just a filler. It's like, think of it as talcum powder. It really doesn't add any strength. It's not an epoxy. And another trick, as always, with epoxy or with anything with a chemical base, as soon as you're done, wash your hands with some real good soap and water. In this case, my hands get pretty roughed up. once I get this, I can put this whole thing, once I get this down to where I'm happy with it, obviously the next step is, and believe me, it turned out to be a pretty nice day. I think we're going to be able to get some, let's see, we got about another hour left. Get some spray time going here. That'd be real nice. Anyway, that's sands, and just keep it good and wet. Yeah, it's turned into a spray painting day. Jeez, we got puddles everywhere, but it's definitely nice to spray. This will be a good test. The humidity is really still around 70%. We'll see if this paint blushes. If it gets any sunnier, we'll be able to fly today. Anyway, as always with any silver, shake the heck out of it. Shake it to death if you can. Now there's a couple of spots on here that I put the putty on as a touch-up. And since I want to get extra on here, let me get one coat on first. Just to see if we've got a decent blend. I have to be really careful with the wind. Yeah, maybe we're not going flying today. Forget it. All the places to putty is I want to put an extra coat. All of the spots along the leading edge here where it looked like it was getting thin, in by the fillets. I know the trailing edge I had worked on. Again, this coat of silver doesn't have to be real pretty. What it is just to show me the mistakes. Because I'd rather correct them now than have them corrected once it's in silver paint. Once it's in camo, then it gets really difficult to be making these corrections. Right now the whole tail can be done. Boy, what day is this thing? Well, you never can tell with the weather around here. Unbelievable. They were predicting 4 inches of rain today. The rain came and went in a half an hour, and here we are painting away. Oh, yeah. One thing we got to deal with is this wind. The wind around here comes and goes in a matter of minutes, so you could just walk away from the plane for 1 minute and when I was painting the Sidewinder, I went inside to refill the gun, came out, and the plane was upside down. I had 2 days of repair work to fix it. There comes the wind right now. So I'm kind of on my guard. So what I'll do is I'll paint everything I can see from the top, and obviously flip it over then, let it dry first, through the bottom, but mainly from this point on, I want to get all the spots that I've worked on touching up. I've got quite a bit of touch-up going on in here. And I find this way to be the most efficient way, is just do it as you go along. When you leave it all to the end, you always take the shortcut and you leave a couple of spots that look terrible and the guy's in appearance judging, ha, there it is, got him. Ooh, I can see there's a couple of ribs here that, and even if you put extra on the ribs, it's not a problem. Wow, this paint is laying down nice today. Whoa. The truth is, we've almost never painted with Brodak dope where the conditions have been good. We're always trying to fight something, humidity or something. It's easy enough to use when conditions are bad. When they're good, it's total idiot proof. Well, I can't imagine anybody that can't get a reasonably nice finish, even with taking every shortcut in the book. This stuff is just so nice to work with. I even saw Ted Fancher had a little email out there, some kind of little thing that I've heard about through the grapevine, that he was very pleased with it. That's good to hear. He's certainly one of the top finishers, and he would know. I'm trying to go over the spots where I really want to do a touch-up so that I can get that extra coat on, but that the sun will just cook this right out. Now while that's drying, I can work my way down in here. Paint just lays down like a good stepchild. Boy, oh boy. Now in my case, I have some, I'll leave this out here, but I'm going to sit right by it. And so before I can get the bottom done, this will all have to dry. And then once this side dries, I'll flip it over and I'll have a whole coat of silver on that fuselage. To cowl some of the pieces that are starting to look like they'll be ready for paint. Gee, that Brodex silver is just unbelievable. These can stay out. And that dried up beautifully. Now I'm hanging it up by a heating vent just to let it get some more dry time. And make it, see now this area here is still a little rough. But what I want to do is maybe let this dry an hour or two, 2 hours maybe. Just sand this area here, just these little blisters. And I think I've really come close to having, well, we're going to find out. Having the look that I want on those blisters. I want them, I want to have those exhaust ports coming out. Again, that's the technique, and believe me, if you've never done this, this is a difficult thing to get a perfect blend. But I hope those little tips I put on the tape will help everybody. We'll get more of these semi-scale models going. Boy, love them all. It's all done. I guess we're not going to know until we get it all done. Now the trick here, and by the way, one of the things I really have come to appreciate is the quick dry time, because I want to do spot patches. Well, I said I want to answer this phone. Can you believe this? No, I tried to get this little area nice and flat and prototypical of what happened. I sanded through in a few spots. So again, when you sand through, seal everything with CA. Dust sand it down. I can feel I hopefully got this filled. As soon as this dries, 5-10 minutes, I'll block sand that out. Where it's real critical and where it always will show you errors is right around the edge where you did that blend, that hard to soft blend. But what this will allow me to do, if I can get this all done before it's dark, is get a second coat of silver just on this area. Now, a good choice. While I'm letting this dry, I'm looking around for any other little areas that, and there are some here that look at what happened here. This is funny. Not funny to me. A bug flew into the paint while it was wet. I can sand that out. Looking around to see how my fillets are coming out. And again, this fillet up here, is it this one or the other one? One of these is not up to my, that's this one right here. There's a spot here I'm not really crazy with. And again, I'm going to work on the fillets as a separate thing, but while this is drying, I'm trying to walk around. A little spot up here I don't like either. I can address these things one by one. This will be ready to sand down 5-10 minutes, and it'll be ready to shoot silver again. Okay, this basically can just dry overnight, and we'll pick this up in the morning. Well, speaking of semi-scale, in today's, hey, look at this. Bob, maybe we'll send you a set of these if we ever get them done. It's from Bob English in California. He sent some photos and a set of plans that are basically based on the Allroyd Mustang. He drew these on his own. And he says he doesn't even have a computer or a CAD cam. Look at these nice cockpit details. He said he really spent some time. Now, this would be great for Danny. So, Steve, I hope you'll pass this tape on to Dan. Maybe what I'll do is I'll pass these plans on to Dan. Get some ideas. Look at the cockpit. Canopy. Again, this is from Bob English. Anybody would like a set of these, they can obviously contact Bob. He's a member of Pampa. P-51, Cadillac of the Skies. Boy, don't we know that. Cadillac of the Skies. If you've never seen this, this is the end of Empire of the Sun. And there is a scene in here I know where Bob got that. Bob, I always have this scene right on tap. There's Dan Banjock. He's not kidding. P-51 Cadillac in the sky. Bob's rendition of the wing drawing, and it's pretty detailed, pretty nice. Tail, pretty much the same as Dan's tail. The little countersinks. I guess these are taking most of it right off because he says it's legal for whatever nostalgia stunt because it was an Al-Rabe design. Again, these are photos from Bob English. A couple of things of note is the swept forward dihedral wing. Bob also has drawn up plans to, I got to show you this other picture he sent here, a junior T-bird. Anybody would be interested. A little, and this is worth looking at in detail. This is absolutely worth looking at. And this ship, which is the Warhawks, we've had those on the video before. But there's one I absolutely, and boy, Bob, this couldn't have come at a better time. I'm going to be ready by next week to do canopy detail. Look at this canopy detail. I mean, take a real close look at that canopy detail. Unbelievable. Now, Bob, I have to tell you, my wife still has the Angel you sent us a couple of years ago. I hope you still have the twin. And boy, I am totally, this is really some piece of work. You can really tell, I'm really taking my hat off to Bob. Look at the stick, how realistic it is. I'm not even going to send this into Stunt News. I'm going to keep this for my own looking at while I'm doing this, well, cockpit that's coming up in the Spitfire. More to come. Bob, thanks a lot. Good luck with the P-51. I don't know if you already have a canopy, but if you don't, you know, when you get this video, please, hey, let me know and we'll get one of these Banjock molds out to you. P-51, Cadillac of the sky. Now, last night, I just went over this again. This dried overnight. Go over all little spots. And what I've been doing is being very selective. I got some spots in the back here, too. Some spots where I've picked up little errors, little mistakes. There's one under the tail here. Any place where you've put your fingernail in or where the fillet isn't just right. Just remember, when you're using this material, you can't use this material for anything that's going to need strength. This is only a cosmetic material. But there's certainly a place for it, and especially up here. Now, there's still a couple little spots. From this point on, I don't want to use anything but 1200 sandpaper, and I'll put another coat of silver on that, and then I can work on something like the flap fillet or one of the next little pieces that I need to work on today. One of the things when you're doing this real final filling in, you're always tempted to grab a piece of 600 or 400 and just get it done. It takes a lot longer to do it with 1200, but what you don't get those gouges where you're putting a scratch and then oops, you're right back down to raw wood. So what I try to do, again using the M600, I just want to feather the edges in, and I try to do it real gingerly. Plus, there's a lot of little spots on the plane that and what it is, this is my way of doing it, of touching it up as I go along. Otherwise, when you get to the end of the plane and you go to touch it up, oh man, it's just like it never ends. This is kind of like pay now or pay me later. But if you want all these little spots filled in, and assuming everybody would like to have a 20-point plane, a 20-point plane means there's no fingernail marks in it, there's no little gouges, little everything. And this is the point at which a lot of people really don't want to spend the time or the energy or the effort. And I don't blame them. I really wish I could get on with this. I'm itching to do that camo job. But anyway, I made up a little priority list of while this is drying, I guess I can work on the flap fillets, those little pieces back there. See, I'm trying to gauge while one thing is drying, I could be working on something else. A real handy tool, this little guy here. And again, another little Bob Martin sanding block. It's got a piece of 16th plywood on it. And what this allows me to do, where I have an internal fillet, always the hardest thing in the world to sand is an internal, where you have an inside fillet, allows me to get right down in that corner with a little sanding block. Again, this is a point at which it's just how much willpower do you have to just get all the detailing done. Always use your finger back here where the blend is. And with so many people building semi-scale planes now, you really, if you're really fanatical about this, you want to have something that sets yours apart from the crowd. I would expect there's going to be a lot of semi-scale planes. I hope Banjock got his done. The Mosquitoes, there's 2 Mosquitoes. Bob English's planes. You do with your hand and just feel that when you know it's done. Now getting this, I put a little filler on here because there was a couple of spots that were really deep. I want to get the rest of this just 1200 sanded out and then reshoot the silver on this spot, assuming it's not raining out there. We've been ducking in and out of good days and bad days here. Always use your hand. Your hand is always so good at finding little flaws. I want to include one little thing. I always use a little piece of 64th plywood, and you can see you can flex it one way, not so much the other way. But the way you can flex it against the wing, what's real handy to have, and you don't want to have a corner. You want to try not to catch the corner here. Here's where this really comes in really handy, is for dressing off this little fillet area. And I just brushed a little bit of filler in there. Let it dry 5 minutes. You can get right in there with the 64th plywood, and you get a nice blend where it comes in. What good is the moon? See, having the right sanding tools makes all of these things very easy. When you don't have these tools, trying to do this with just the ends of your finger, it really isn't even difficult. It's impossible. But getting that blend into the fillet, unless you're going to put a big, tremendous fat fillet. To me, big fat fillets are like fat molding on a Victorian house. They're just there to cover up the bad sheetrock work. If you have real nice wood fits, you don't need any fillet at all. And by the way, the smaller you make a fillet, the less chance there is it's ever going to bubble or blister or pop or any other thing. But we're trying to keep these fillets as small as possible. And me will be there waiting. You gotta have the sanding tools. That's the whole deal. My shadow and me. While it's drying, I can carve up or make a little prototype of that little scoop that goes underneath the belly of the plane while this is out here drying. The little scoop on the original Spitfire was a nice little detail touch. And again, each model of the Spit has a different scoop. The Seafire had a totally different shape scoop, but we have the documentation, and I want to make this as close to being an early Spit as possible. The early models are very small, relative to the later model ones, a very small air scoop. You get a little idea just about the size, and it's very small, in fact. These are the early model ones, designated with the Siamese type exhausts, single radiator. It shows a little replication of this in the one of the books that I have the documentation for. And I don't want to make this any larger than, so it doesn't really look unprototypical. I'd like to get it as close to being the scale size as possible. Get a little idea of exactly what that side view is, and it's just behind the front part of the wing. Here's a picture of the bottom. This gives you a pretty good view. I think I'll hold this picture aside to one of them that I want to work with. It's kind of it's rounded on both sides and flat in the middle. Now, depending on, how prototypical you want to make it, or if you just want to have a fantasy plane, well, in this case, this really is a fantasy plane, but I'd like to make it as accurate as possible. Yeah, I've got plenty of drawings now to work with, so this should be relatively easy. On a later model ones, how big this is, and when I did the Seafire, I remember thinking, wow, and it comes out way past the front of the wing, this really got to be a large thing. Of course, has the double radiators. The early ones only have one radiator. This is interesting because Karen and I are planning a trip to England real soon. We'll probably be spending 2 weeks in England. And one of the things for sure I'm going to be doing is shooting a lot of video and pictures of the surviving Spitfires. Now this is, just take a look at, I have a list here of all of the surviving Spitfires, a picture and the history of them. Kind of neat. And by having all this, I mean you can just, talk about a selection of paint jobs or options or invasion stripes or something. There's just, I don't know, to me this is one of the nicest planes to model. Possibly the only contender as far as variety goes is the P-51. Not many more choices than a Spitfire. But I love having these books. It's one of the ones with the desert air filter. That actually would look pretty cool on a stunt ship. And believe it or not, it would be prototypical. This is an early model Spit. I'm still thinking about that shark mouth job. Love that look. I'm gonna look for a decent piece of wood and let's start carving. Okay, so step one is going to be to cut the basic outline shape. First thing, I'll get a scrap block, and I want to get a sanding block and get this to roughly, because the plane is out there drying anyway, so it roughly mates up to the bottom of the bottom block, and then I can lay out the scoop from both dimensions. Again, if you're in doubt in this kind of thing, always make it a little bit bigger to start with. You can always shape it down. If you make it too small, you got to carve it over. The trick is just unroll enough of these sanding blocks that this is roughly the shape of the fuselage, and you can put that angle right in there in a matter of 4 or 5 minutes. If it's not enough, you can take some sanding sheets off or just add them. Or you can even do this, you just squeeze it down. But you want to get before you do anything, you want to get a real nice tight fit on that so it mates right up to that lower side of the fuselage without a big gap. I don't want to fill any of these gaps in. Well, just for a start, see, I'm trying to come up with something for a start. Again, I'll definitely make it larger than it has to be. Using a circle template is always a good idea. And I'll try to... Again, most of this is just what you do by eye anyway. And go over and look at the documentation and see if I'm even close with that. Now that would mean I'm here. And I can just roughly get that. And then go in there. The idea when I'm trying to shape it, and of course shape half at a time, and look at the little pictures that I have to try to get it, well, somewhat close to being realistic anyway. Next thing is to try to get this to draw back. So I can either do that by putting a little line on here and then carving down to it, or just doing it by eye. It's such a small part, I'll just do it by eye. Get this taper. Oh, it's starting to take shape now, but whoop, and he drops it and cracks it. Again, the biggest asset is having this shape in here already, because if we didn't, well, carving up to that would be very difficult. And from this point on, I'll probably just use a sanding block and then start tapering this down to the size that's about as close as I expect it to be. This looks like a relatively simple part. When you start carving, you go, it takes a little time to do this. I just go very slowly until I know I have the shape I want. Try to keep it as symmetrical as possible. And just to get this shape, this is a little bit too flattened out. I wanted to draw this in, so I just retrace the lines on, and I'll just sand that into the new line. Next step here is going to be, I need to mount this because I want to coat the whole outer shell of this. I did a little test fit. It looks like it's going to be a pretty close fit. Soak it with a couple of coats of thin CA, sand in each coat down. That'll give me a little bit of a shell to start my finish on. Now see, if I was to glue this on and then try to finish under here, picture what's going to happen. Never going to do it. By putting this on at the last minute after the silver's all sanded out, gives you a good fighting chance of getting a nice finish in here. There's nothing special about how to do this. We've done this enough. Leave the dust on. Don't use kicker. Wipe it with a paper towel or a Q-tip before it really starts to go off and make popcorn. Usually 2 or 3 coats. Sand in each coat lightly. Gives you a nice shell. You can put the base of the finish right on that. Just let that kick off normally. I usually need 2 or 3 coats. And you're never committed here where you can't change the shape. You can just sand through and then re-CA it. And just wait for it to kick. The dust and the cotton usually will kick it right off. And by the way, you may want to put a little scoop like this even on a garden or on an SV11 or something. You want to have some, this is a good way to make a little additional scoop. It's also good if you ever ding up the top block and you want to cover up the ding, this is a good way to do it. What I want to do is with a Dremel tool, get a bit that's just a little bit smaller than this and recess this area in here so I can simulate this little intake. It isn't just a flat piece. It's got about 4 coats of CA on that so far, and of course whatever drips over, I'll run that back over that roll of sanding sheets. I just want to leave just a little bit of a lip on the edge of that. Now, the only trouble with doing it this way, I want to leave a rib in the back because any oil or any dirt that gets in here, I don't want to have it that it goes right into the bottom of the fuselage. This tool is so handy. If you don't have one of these, this is really, it's so nice not to have that wire hanging on. Good tool. An Allen wrench and some of that sticky back paper and just roll it till it's the right diameter because I want to be able to sand in there. I want to harden it up with thin CA. And you want to be able that when you look in there, you don't see an edge or that you can't identify that it's balsa wood. You want to have some kind of illusion that it's really a scoop. Making up the right sanding tool is always such an important part of any modeling job. Without these little tricks and tools and things, you look at something and how do you sand that? When you're all done, you want to kill that edge. And I want to harden that whole thing up with thin CA. That gives you a good illusion when that's painted black inside and it has a little piece of that chrome screen that it really does look like the scoop. It's not just a lump. The thin CA in this part, this actually is serving a lot of purposes. It's stiffening up the wood, hardening it up. This is a good trick when you have a little scoop like this. Just glue the Q-tip in. I want to harden that edge up as much as I can. You know how many times I've done this and glued the Q-tip in place? Whoop, don't you do that. Whatever's left over, you can give an extra coat to the edges that are going to take the most beating, of course. Always break that inside edge. Oh, this is a good technique you can use for any kind of cowl scoops, air exhausts, even if you're not doing semi-scale. Sometimes on a little part like this, now see, I have the choice of hollowing this all out before I actually install it, but it's just difficult to find a way to hold the part while you do the sanding and finishing. In this case, always leaving a part unhollowed, so you can just stick a knife in it. Of course, that's helpful while it's being painted, too. Okay, got that brushed on the first coat of silver filler. Let this dry. And then we'll work the finish up just like we would on a regular plane. A couple of coats of filler, sanded between coats, spray coat or two of silver, and it'll be ready to put on. Now I wanted to do a little test. I haven't, up to this point, really used a lot of Brodak primer. And it's a product that really has a lot of good uses in the hobby. One of the things I don't think it's going to be is a universal substitute for talc and dope. But it does have some really nice uses, and one of them is, now when I put these on, there was little imperfections in the blend where you go from the green stuff to various little, where it just wasn't right. The silver shows that up immediately. Now what I did, I sprayed on a little bit of the Brodak primer is a white base. So as opposed to silver, it doesn't really make mistakes jump out at you, but you can get some idea of how nice it sands out. And the main thing is it feathers in. Now, you know, any primer, the number one job of any primer is you have to be able to feather the edge in where the primer ends and the paint begins. And in this case, absolutely beautiful. Let me just show this up close before and after. This is a significant good thing. Now this would be a typical thing if we're going to do any repairing where we would use Brodak primer. What's significant here is how nice this blends in. And boy, this material blends in better than any auto primer I've ever seen. But keep in mind, one of the things that's a big advantage here, this is dope. This is not auto primer. You don't have that conflict of acrylic and dope where it just really, they're both drying in a different way. This is all Brodak dope. So on a spot repair, and you can see the spot I was trying to repair here, I figured I'd do both of them. There's a couple little spots. When you really want to get every little flaw out of something, you just need to go back and do this over some amount of time. I don't know how many times. I'm going to shoot on, I'm going to take this outside real quick and shoot a little right on top of this because I want to feather edge this in just a little bit. But when you're all done with primer, any kind of primer, you want to cover that last little spot, all these little spots, and then put the silver right on top of it. And that's probably the best way to get rid of little flaws. As another test, I just took a striping brush. I did this before. I just wanted to see how it was going to work and ran it right in the fillet to see just if that was going to be worth doing, if that was going to be something that, well, when I sand that out the next time, I'll know if this is going to sand out the way I want it to or not. Anyway, this will be a good test for Brodak primer. Test is I keep a spare gun and I'm going to put nothing but Brodak primer in here and put a little piece of tape identifying it. Here's a simple reason. If you don't look real close, this looks like ordinary white paint, but it's got the priming ingredients in it. See, the whole idea is to feather edge in that Brodak primer. And boy, it is cold and windy out there. This was really difficult spraying out there. I'm going to do that little scoop too. I'll sand that scoop down. Now you see I had some silver talc that I brushed on here. I'm going to sand this down, put a coat of Brodak primer on here. See, I'm trying to test paint, since this is the first plane I've gone the whole finish on without having anything but Brodak paint. This will keep that everything on the plane will be Brodak. And the most important thing, I'll see just how this primer is going to lay in between coats of silver, which is really the use I can anticipate that it has its best use, in between coats of silver fixing floors. Now it could be that it'll really be good if I can figure a way of, once you sand the silver out, priming only the spots that look like they need a little help. Anyway, this little scoop came out nice. But it'll be a good test, and that's part of what we're trying to accomplish with this plane. Okay, you can see that silver fill is sanded down. Now, but you can see just by looking at it, it doesn't have a perfectly smooth skin yet. We're going to have to build that up, and I want to try to prime it. This is a good little part to try it on. Okay, you can see there's still some little flaws in it. Let's see if we can find them. Yeah, there's a few. I saw a few. Oh, I don't see them. Maybe the primer's filling them in. Anyway, if I sand this down and sand it almost all off, it'll probably be ready for a coat of silver. But that's a 2-coat finish on there, so that's pretty good. Now I can picture another good use for this: wheel pants, cowlings. We haven't really finished the cowling up yet, but that's another tentative use for this. The way this was working out, it was working out pretty good, so I figured I'd try feathering some in on the fillet. Again, I'm trying to find some good uses for this. This really has, the material first off has a really heavy pigment filler content, so when you do spray it on, it really feathers in just beautifully. But of course it takes a little, there's always a learning curve, there's always a little time during which you have to get used to each product. And we're going to find more uses for this as we go along. There was still one little spot back here I noticed. Again, once this dries up, I'll sand it out, put another coat of silver on top of it. Okay, I'm back from lunch, having my coffee, and what I'm trying to do, a couple of things. I dusted on another little coat of this. I'm just trying to get a feel for just how long it takes for this to dry under shop conditions. It looks like an hour and a half is plenty for it to dry, and it really sands out. This is really some material that really sands out nicely. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to try to push this a little further. Just going to sand this down and try to get a coat of silver on this, because I know I'll see flaws in silver. In fact, I see one in here, right down in here. You can see that little guy? I'll sand that out. But this is a material, I did the fillets again, but maybe 2 hours ago, being realistic. There's going to be a time or a place. Now, I'm going to try a little sanding experiment on this. I haven't tried this yet. I just got the stuff in the mail from Dave Midgley. I want to give this a... This is a first-time test. Dave Midgley sent me down these pads. They're sanding pads, and I've never used them before. But he says they're real good for sanding primer. So let's cut these up a little bit. And again, they're made by 3M. We have some other 3M products here, similar to this, but this is made to sand. One of the jobs it's made for is a sand primer. So let's see how it works. It's one of the areas it's really hard to get down in there with a sanding, well, even with a sanding tool, but I want to see if this is going to do. Now, this is supposed to be the equivalent of 600 grit. They make this, it's called ultrafine, by the way. They make this in, and the way we got to this was I was asking Dave to find that 3M product that basically polishes aluminum, and he came up with this. Well, it seems to remove the material as well as anything. I'm just seeing if it's practical to use this. You can put a fold in it. Again, I have to do a couple little tests here, but basically for a fillet like this, and the primer, and I'm going to, as this tape series evolves, I'm sure I'm going to find more and more uses. In fact, I can see this is feathering in the primer real nice too. Oh yeah, that really is nice. Now the other test for this would be, let's see, just Again, we're just testing and fooling around here. This is some M600. Oh yeah, takes it right off instantly. Oh boy. This, for all purposes, just takes the paint right off. But it leaves it in the little gouges, which I'm going to do a little experiment with this. This looks like we may have a future somewhere in our arsenal of things. We'll have to ask Dave if this comes in other grits. Possibly even one grit finer would be okay. No, this is really coming out nice. More on this in the next tape or two, as I find some other uses for this. For this particular thing on the fillets, wow. This is a nice material with M600. Just lets it really get right in the corner there and make for a nice fillet. You can see how long it took me to do that fillet, so. Where I found this to be the most useful, a great tip. Spray the pad, spray the area. It gets right in corners, and watch how this comes right off. Corners and crevices and little fillet areas like this. Now, since I'm going around and indiscriminately just finding areas where there's little errors and little things to fix. I mean, obviously what I'm trying to do is make a museum quality model here. But everybody wants to have no flaws in the model. I mean, who wants to have that there's flaws in the model? Now, we'll find some more uses for this. What's going to happen, we're going to find uses for a lot of things. Because every day that goes by here with this Brodak dope, we find other ways, newer ways, better ways that this may even be something I can do to sand out a tissue wing, an open bay wing. I'm going to try it on a silver here and just see what happens. See, with silver, you can take it on, put it over, you just do this over and over, it doesn't even matter. And just respray it. It doesn't clog at all. It takes the Brodak primer right down, even though it's only been drying a couple hours. Wow, that's really nice. That is really a nice. This is something I think we're going to find more uses for. Well, believe it or not, I got George Venturini here inspecting my silver. What do you think, George?
Well, I seen better.
Let's see that little scoop. Did that dry up? Yeah. All right. Got a coat of silver on that. Went through, touched up all the little spots around the, well, whatever we're going to call these, the valve covers. Yeah, little by little.
I gotta say it's good. I didn't get any coffee yet.
Yeah, all right. Well, the coffee comes as soon as this dries up to the touch. You notice how he isn't walking away. He is being paid top dollar to stand by the wing, and in case a gust of wind comes, because every time I do this, a gust of wind just takes the plane, I come back and it's in the neighbor's yard.
Years of training.
Years of training to hold that scoop in one hand and a lead out in the other hand. Anyway, this is it for today. We're going to let this dry and go make some carbon fiber landing gear. George, that Brodak primer would have been good when we did Big Tsunami. You know, when you put all our auto primer on, that Brodak primer would have been great for that. It sands a lot better than the auto. Oh, here comes the wind again. Hang on.
Yeah.
Hang on to the model. Yeah! Don't go away.
I want to cut
A fruitful day. This is like an hour after I sprayed the silver. And I have that pad. I'm going to try using it dry on the silver. Just on little details like this. And what it is, this speeds up. I don't want to use it wet. I want to see how it works dry. I know it works wet fine. But we've got a little friend here, this little sanding pad. I'm going to have to get more on the next video on this. This really does a nice job of burnishing this little scoop that we made. Now, another little trick. Because it's flexible, you can stick it, not that this is the most important thing in the world, but little areas in a cowling or around a canopy or something, difficult to get areas, you can dig right in. All right, so the next thing I want to do here, I want to see if I'm satisfied with the finish on this. I'm never satisfied. I'll get one more coat of silver on this before I glue it in place. And this will be ready to glue in place. As little of a detail as this is one of those things that, hey. Okay, now the last thing I want to do, I want to line this up in what I hope is going to be the correct position. I sanded it all down with the pads, and the last thing I want to do here is I want to hollow this out a little bit. Although I wonder how much I can get out of it. I know I can get a little bit of material, but I want to leave just enough that I get a good footprint. That's a real nice tight fit, by the way. I'm lining this up just about as in the prototypical position as I can get it. Even a little detail like hollowing this out, I don't want to skip anything. Let's see what I can do to see how far down that scoop goes. I can see right about here is the end of that. I want to leave that little, like a rib, so I can hollow everything from there back. Now, it may seem a little fanatical, but even a little bit of weight like this means I can put more details in the cockpit or something. I don't know what. More pepperoni in the pizza. I want to leave enough of a lip that I can get a good glue joint on there. But I still leave enough material. I don't want to get it paper thin either. Noel Drindak would love this, believe me. Noel, this one's for you. This is probably 2 grams. This little scoop, a lot of people don't spend this much time building a whole plane. I tried this is another piece of that sanding sponge. When you're doing an internal, like let's say this is inside of a cowling or a top block, this works great on wood too. I'm going to send some of this up to Noel Drindak. He's the man. He probably knows all the uses for this, I'm sure. Look how nice. Take a second here. Look how nice that hollowed that out. Hey, that's ready to install. It's like the scoop of a cobra or something. I want to install this until I had all the silver painted. Otherwise, sanding around it. But I don't want to wait until it's totally finished because I want to get a seam around the edge. And I'm going to try to do that with some Brodak primer just to see if that's going to be a viable way of doing it. Get a nice seal in there, of course. Now the reason I'm using a little slow drying epoxy here is the thing I want to do is I want to put a footprint on there to see if I have a good seal around here. Now I want to see if I get a good glue footprint. And obviously get it centered. Okay, now I'm not getting a good footprint. I need a little pressure here. Okay, now I got it. Now before this sets up, let me get a little Q-tip and some alcohol. And obviously make sure it's centered. Just the slightest little bit of alcohol. Now as this starts to kick, I want to just babysit it. I want to put a little pressure on it, but I sure don't want to put an anvil or something on it. And a lot of people leave out the little details on a model. Well, this is one we could very easily, conveniently leave out. I think this adds a lot to the overall appearance of the model. Now we're coming up on the end of this tape, and I'm just tickled to death with the couple things I've learned in the last couple days. Hey, it's already dark out there. I lose track of the time when I'm in here. Well, did we get the scoop right? I don't know, and I don't know how it's going to look in terms of having it even with the leading edge. Hey, so many more details on this thing to work with, and this is what you get used to in this time of your life. Is your hands are silver every night, your cuticles are rotted, but boy, it's worth it. Yeah, and I go back and forth with the book. I think we got it pretty close this time, and having it lined up with the leading edge, it looks like about how I'd want to have it. Now this is one of the next steps we're going to work on the next tape. Well, maybe the next tape, I don't know. We still don't have the canopy, so we're going to try to do some more detailing, and this would be the next thing to detail out. Is they make up the mold to make up the plug for these manifolds. See, I try to plan ahead. Anytime I know I'm waiting for paint to dry, I like to make some kind of a little hit list of things I want to do. It's a very rare picture. This is actually George Aldrich installing a Jet 50 in the new 1939 in a Spitfire. Little known fact, these early Spits were powered by Jet 50s. Just kidding, anybody? Just kidding. Hey, but I still been thinking about that shark mouth. Another rare picture from the archives. This is Steve DeJulia's cellar in 1939. Little known fact, he was building mosquitoes for the RAF. With a Siamese exhaust, that'll be a challenge to model, that's for sure. There's one with the Desert Scoop here and the Siamese exhaust. And these early Spitfire paint jobs, they really have a lot of variation, a lot of choices in early model Spitfires. The guys up in Albany are so sick of waiting for Rob Aronstein to finish that Mosquito with the retracts that they set his Spitfire on fire. True story. Now, not many people know this. This is a true story though too. John Brodak in 1939 decided he wanted to have a pink Spitfire for his wife Buzz, so he bought a real Spitfire. This